What screams this person peaked in high school to you? Hey girl, hey. Do you wanna be your own boss babe while working from home, and it's just a pyramid scheme? I had a conversation in a bar with a drinking buddy years ago. The guy kept going on about the one that got away. How perfect she was and their chemistry together, how natural it was, how he hasn't felt that way about any girl since, yada yada. He was feeling pretty sorry for himself and uninterested in meeting anyone else because they could never compare. When I asked how long ago it was that she moved away, he said 8th grade. LMFAO. I graduated in 05. I was sitting at a tire shop waiting for my truck to get done and an employee slightly older than me walks up to me and asks me, with no previous interaction, if I played football in high school. Wondering where this was going, I responded that I did, but I wasn't great at it. He asked what school I went to, and I told him. Then he starts talking about himself. How he was all confidence and walking me through all of his high school accolades. I never asked for this conversation. I just sat there wondering why this nearly 40-year-old, wildly out of shape, tire shop supervisor was telling me all of this. Then just as soon as it started he bid me good day and walked off. It was bizarre. The best comparison I could make was that he was like the manager Dan from the movie Waiting. That was his vibe. That's how I knew he peaked in high school. Still acting like a typical mean girl when they're damn near, or past, 30. Bragging about high school hookups in their 30s. My ex-stepmother constantly bragged about being a cheerleader in high school and winning a beauty walk, in a town of like 500 people. She was still bragging about these the last time I saw her. She was in her mid-40s. One guy I knew literally got our school emblem and mascot in a huge class of 2010 tattooed on his shoulder. Regularly reposting the same picture of the one notable moment that they had in high school. Anyone who bullies other adults as if they were still in high school. Ridiculing the hobbies of others to make yourself look good. These are the best years of your life on repeat. Almost 10 years after high school, a guy asked me if one of my friends was popular in high school. The people that ask you to join those MLM schemes selling body wraps or the like. Anyone that has a salt life decal on their car when they live nowhere near the ocean or even a salt mine. Still going to every high school football game and sitting in the student section. Talking about high school in every conversation and gossips like a high schooler. Which black and white movies are absolutely worth watching? 7 Samurai, original 1954 version. Double Indemnity. The Thin Man. 12 Angry Men, 1957. Young Frankenstein. To Kill a Mockingbird. Dr. Strangelove. Arsenic and Old Lace. Psycho. All About Eve. Harvey, 1950. Edit, 1950. Some Like It Hot. The Night of the Hunter. Sunset Boulevard. Gaslight, Ingrid Bergman version. Redditors who have worked around death/burial, what's your best ghost story? I worked within hospice and long-term care. The spookiest phenomenon was the man in the corner. It happens all the time for people actively dying. They see a shadowy man in the corner of their room. Not me, but a colleague found a dead person in a dark smoke-filled burned-out building during the mop-up of firefighting operations. As unfortunately happens sometimes, you find them by stepping on them. If they're still intact you kinda bounce off them. If they're fried, you can often crunch them up pretty bad under your heavy boot. Well, this guy stood right on a badly burned corpse's sternum. Crunch, right into the chest cavity. When he tried to pull his foot out it got stuck on the ribs and the body came up at him. Burned up arms flailing about. Took him a few tried with what looked like a zombie stuck on his leg. He needed quite a bit of counseling, poor dude. I have a million that are more grotesque and gory than this one, but it stands out to me. I was once working at a mortuary and had to go pick up a man from the medical examiner's office. When you do that, at least where I'm from, you get a receipt when they release the body to you. The receipt has all of the personal belongings that are with the deceased. When I brought the man back to the office I opened up the body bag to make sure all the belongings were there and double-checking the receipt. When I opened up the bag I was stunned to find this dude looked almost exactly like me. He was my age, had similar tattoos and similar spots, had the same long hair I do, even had the same style of jewelry I was wearing. It took me so off guard that I stood there in an existential crisis until the embalmer came in and was like, "Hey Spartan M00, how's it going? Holy shit, that guy looks like you. It's the only case I've had nightmares about. It'll be the one in the body bag with the deceased man opening me up." Corpses move when you cremate M. People who don't know this get spooked a lot. Honestly, the only creepy thing that happened when I worked in the morgue is that one of the staff killed himself in there, and I just can't imagine wanting to die in this cold, grey place surrounded by corpses. I used to work in a nursing home. The residents in certain rooms would complain about a man in their room at night, but hallucinations are common in the elderly, so it wasn't really noticed. One night I was moping the dining room, which had huge windows overlooking the garden. It was around 1 AM, so pitch black outside and low lighting inside. I had this horrible feeling of being watched, so looked up, and reflected in the window was a man behind me. He had a brown suit in, a bowler hat, and the cruelest look on his face. He grinned and his mouth was too big. This happened in seconds, and when I turned around there was obviously noon there, but I'll never forget that look of evil on his face. I paid more attention to the residents after that, and they'd all seen the same man. He just enjoyed terrorizing people. During my apprenticeship, I worked at a funeral home said to be haunted by an old funeral director assistant who had a heart attack in the building and died. All he ever did was mess with the chapel lights, and if you called him out, something like, "John, the family is coming, please don't," they would return to normal. Not really sure if I believe it was really haunted, but saying something always fixed the issue, so I kept doing it my entire time there. I used to work on an oncology ward as a nurse. Our side rooms were kept for end-of-life patients on palliative care, and one patient that we had been nursing for a good few weeks died early one morning. Last offices had already been done by the night staff, and the patient moved to the hospital morgue, so all that remained was to clear the room of personal belongings and tidy up. I sent a student nurse that I was mentoring at the time to do this whilst I got on with the drug round. The student had known the patient fairly well and was comfortable with this job. About 10 minutes after, a colleague came to me and told me that my student had come flying out of the side room white as a sheet and was sobbing in the staff room. I went to find out what the problem was, and the student told me she had been clearing out sink area in the bathroom, had glanced up and seen the deceased patient reflected in the mirror looking at her over her shoulder. My student was a sensible girl, not given to hysterics, but for the remainder of her placement on that ward she would not go near that side room. I used to be a driver for a funeral home corporation. Drive the hearse and pick up the bodies. Never had anything creepy happen, a few funny things, a few traumatic things. In general it was a chill job. However, I did get incredibly uncomfortable one night picking up a man who died at home. He still had the defibrillator leads on his chest and his eyes were closed, which is unusual because the eyes are always open. He just looked like he was asleep or unconscious. Not rigid or pale or anything. I just had this sinking feeling for about half an hour in traffic that he was going to suddenly gasp and wake up in the body bag. Then it hit me. That would be the coolest thing ever. I'd take him home and he'd be back with his family. So I just kind of drove slowly and turned up some music and sang along and talked to him. When I got him to the funeral home, I left him out of the cooler for about an hour while I did paperwork and played on my phone. When I got another call, I checked on him and his limbs had started to stiffen. I was kind of bummed. I put him in the cooler and went on my next call. Might be a little tangential, but bear with me. For many years, I was in the US Navy based in Japan. After the tsunami hit Fukushima, we spent a few months off the coast resupplying helicopters that were ferrying supplies and searching for bodies of people who were washed out to sea. When we did find a body, we were instructed to put them in a body bag and store those bags in an area called the Starboard Castleway, sheltered area outside of the pressurized interior, until a Japanese Coast Guard helicopter could come by to retrieve them. For a while after we were finished with that mission, some of my shipmates reportedly saw ghosts in that area of the ship. I didn't see any ghosts, but it was not uncommon for me to feel some unnatural chills there. Not a ghost story, but when I was in the army, I served on a few honor guard duties for transporting soldiers' remains. One time we were taking Korean War-era remains that had been uncovered in Korea and transported to the USA for identification. For most of the remains, the transfer cases, industrial aluminum caskets, were very light, like you'd expect with 40-year-old remains. A couple of the cases were heavy, like a couple 100 pounds. I've never stopped wondering what was in those cases. It wasn't 40-year-old bones. I used to work as a nursing assistant in assisted living communities. Usually when a resident started to need hospice, they were transferred out to a higher level of care, so I didn't see death for a long time. When I first started, my favorite resident, let's call her Marilyn, would play Scrabble with me. She was completely alert and oriented. Sometimes she likes to sit quietly with an iPod shuffle clipped onto her vest and these huge headphones. She loved music. Slowly she started to decline. I would help her get ready for bed and she would get upset when she forgot how to do something. The only thing that calmed her down was playing music off my phone. She liked Frank Sinatra and the Beatles. Her independent ability declined rapidly and soon she was bedridden. Still, loved listening to music. This was during COVID, and her quality of life was diminishing so quickly that we didn't transfer her out. She had an apartment at the facility with all her belongings where she was comfortable. By the end her dementia had progressed to the point that she couldn't remember how to swallow. Marilyn passed away with me, the head nurse and her family at her bedside in her apartment, Unit 202. I did her post-mortem care afterwards, styled her hair how she liked to wear it, even clipped her little iPod onto her shirt. A few days after she died, a woman in 203, her neighbor, kept wandering into the lobby during night shift, always at 3 a.m. She complained of loud music coming from Unit 202. That apartment was vacant, just full of Marilyn's belongings. She said the music was so loud it was deafening. Whenever the night shift worker went to check, he didn't hear anything. Not really creepy, more sad. I miss Marilyn. My grandfather died a while back. One day me and a bunch of my cousins were playing in the front yard, rural area, since on weekends all the family likes to hang out together. So we're out having fun and see Lolo, grandfather, walking towards the house. We all greet him and he smiles at us. He walks up the porch into the house and hangs his hat by the door. We continue playing until we hear crying from the inside of the house and my uncle driving fast up the driveway. We all rush in to see what's going on and see everybody bunched up in the kitchen crying, telling us that Lolo died early that morning and they just found out. He lives a few towns away. We looked at each other and told the grown-ups, "Nah, we just saw him come into the house." They didn't believe us and we told them that he really did not that long ago and he even hung up his hat by the door. So everybody rushes to the door and his hat was hanging right where we said it was. He doesn't ever go anywhere without that hat. So me and my cousins are running all over the house calling for him while our parents are so quiet and freaking out. He actually did die earlier that morning and my grandmother couldn't find his hat anywhere in their house. We left the hat where it was and nobody ever touched it. My roomie/best bud is a mortician, and I'm around the funeral home a fair amount myself and know the staff pretty well. I've spent the night there before. Nothing weird happens there. I have had some experiences I can't explain, so I was a little surprised none of the staff ever had an odd experience, especially since some of them do believe in ghosts and whatnot. But they told me, if ghosts were real, why in the world would they linger at a funeral home? It's just a transition space, like an airport. No one wants to just stay in the damn airport. Haunt the place you died, or the people you love, or the home you never want to leave, or however it works, if it works. Who would want to linger in a funeral home they have no attachment to, that their body only visited after they already were gone? When my cousin was 18 he was in a bad wreck and his girlfriend and her sister were all pronounced dead at the scene. The police arrived to inform my aunt, his mom, and she asked that he be sent to a specific funeral home. While they were preparing to embalm him he raised up and asked, "Where the hell am I?" The funeral director said it was the first time he ever had to go home and change pants. I should add that the top of his head was open and his brain was exposed. He was sent to the hospital. The same police officer came to my aunt's to tell her he was not dead but in the hospital. They thought he'd be in a vegetative state. But a few weeks later he walked out of the hospital. My aunt said it was the worst and best day of her life.